My brother kicked me out to move his girlfriend in. Then he begged me for help when she kicked him out and took everything. I never imagined I'd find myself homeless at 26, but that's exactly what happened when my older brother decided his new girlfriend was more important than our lifelong bond. I'm 28 now, and this whole mess started about 2 years ago. My brother, let's call him Jake, is 3 years older than me. We've always been close growing up. Our parents died in a car accident when I was 17 and he was 20, and since then it's just been the two of us against the world. Our parents left us their house and a modest life insurance policy, which Jake managed since he was the older one. For years, our arrangement worked perfectly. We split all the bills, took turns with chores, and generally had each other's backs. Jake worked as an IT specialist, and I was building my career as a physical therapist. We were doing well, saving money, and living comfortably in our childhood home. It was filled with memories of our parents, and though it wasn't fancy, it meant everything to us. Or so I thought. Everything changed when Jake met Vanessa. They started dating about 2.5 years ago, and from the beginning, something felt off about her. She was beautiful, sure, the kind of woman who turned heads whenever she walked into a room, but there was a coldness behind her eyes that made me uneasy. Whenever Jake wasn't looking, she would give me these smug little smiles that made my skin crawl. At first, Vanessa would stay over occasionally, which was fine. I tried my best to be welcoming, cooking meals for all three of us and giving them space when they wanted it. But as weeks turned into months, she was staying over more and more. She slowly began rearranging things in our house without asking, moving my mother's antique vase to make room for her own decorations, using my skincare products without permission, taking over the entire refrigerator with her organic food. When I'd mention these things to Jake, he'd brush them off. "She's just trying to feel at home here," he'd say. "Can't you try a little harder to get along with her? She's important to me." The real problems started around the 8-month mark of their relationship. One night, Jake sat me down for what he called an important conversation about the future. "Vanessa and I have been talking," he started, not quite meeting my eyes. "We think it would be best if you found your own place." I stared at him in disbelief. "What are you talking about? This is my house, too." I know, he said quickly. "But Vanessa and I are getting serious. We need our own space to grow as a couple. You're 26 now. Don't you think it's time you had your own place anyway?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The house belonged to both of us, left to us by our parents. I had as much right to be there as he did. "Jake, this is our family home. Mom and Dad left it to both of us, not just you." His face hardened then, in a way I'd never seen before. "Actually, the house is in my name. I was the executor of their will, remember? Legally, I can decide who lives here." That hit me like a punch to the gut. While technically true, Jake had handled all the legal matters after our parents died since I was still a minor. We had always operated on the understanding that the house belonged to both of us. That's what our parents would have wanted. "You can't be serious," I said, the words catching in my throat like shards of glass. "You would kick me out for a woman you've known less than a year?" "Don't be dramatic," he replied. "I'm not kicking you out. I'm just saying it's time for you to move on. Vanessa and I will even help you find an apartment." Over the next few days, I tried everything to reason with him. I reminded him of all the years we'd supported each other, how this house contained all our memories of Mom and Dad. I even offered to pay more toward the bills if money was the issue, but his mind was made up. "Vanessa doesn't feel comfortable with you here," he finally admitted. "She says she can't fully move in while you're around. If you really care about my happiness, you'll understand." I was given 1 month to find a new place and move out. 1 month to leave the only home I'd ever known, the last physical connection I had to our parents. Meanwhile, Vanessa was already bringing in her furniture, replacing our family photos with artwork she'd picked out, transforming our home into hers. The betrayal cut deep, but what could I do? As Jake had smugly pointed out, legally the house was his. I found a small 1-bedroom apartment across town. It was all I could afford on short notice, and it was nothing like the spacious family home I was leaving behind. The day I moved out, Jake barely helped. He was too busy setting up their new entertainment system with Vanessa. As I carried the last box to my car, I paused in the doorway of my childhood home. I hope she's worth it, I said quietly. Jake just shrugged. You'll understand when you're in a serious relationship. Sometimes you have to make tough choices for the people you love. The first few months in my new apartment were tough. I missed home terribly. Not just the physical space, but what it represented. I missed waking up in the room I'd grown up in, cooking in the kitchen where Mom had taught me her secret recipes, sitting on the porch where Dad used to tell us stories on summer evenings. I missed having my brother in my life. Jake and I barely spoke during this time. I'd text occasionally, but his responses were always brief, often hours or days later. When I suggested meeting up for coffee or dinner, he always had an excuse. It became clear that in choosing Vanessa, he had decided to cut me out almost entirely. I threw myself into my work at the physical therapy clinic, picked up extra shifts, made new friends in my apartment building. Slowly, I began to build a life for myself. It wasn't the life I had planned, but I was making it work. I even started dating someone. Michael, a kind, thoughtful guy who worked as a teacher at the local high school. Then, about 8 months after I'd moved out, I got a call from Jake at 2 a.m. I need your help, he said, his voice cracking. He sounded like he'd been crying. What's wrong? Despite everything, he was still my brother. She's gone, Vanessa's gone, and she took everything. I sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake. What do you mean, everything? The story came tumbling out between sobs. Apparently, Jake had given Vanessa access to all his bank accounts. He'd added her name to his credit cards. He'd even been talking about adding her to the house deed, though thankfully he hadn't gotten around to it yet. That afternoon, while he was at work, Vanessa had emptied their joint account, nearly $45,000 in savings. She'd maxed out all 3 of his credit cards, buying luxury items that she could easily resell. She'd taken most of the valuable electronics from the house, some jewelry that had belonged to our mother, and even his car. She'd left him with nothing but a note. Thanks for everything. Don't try to find me. I'm ruined, Jake sobbed. The bank won't help since I authorized her access. The police say it's a civil matter since I gave her permission to use the accounts. I don't know what to do. I sat in silence, processing everything he told me. Part of me, a large part, if I'm being honest, wanted to say, I told you so. I wanted to remind him that he'd chosen this woman over his own sister, that he'd kicked me out of our family home for her, but the brokenness in his voice held me back. Can you come over? He asked. Please. I really need you right now. I should have said no. I had every right to, but despite everything, he was still my brother, the only family I had left. I'll be there in 20 minutes, I said, already reaching for my keys. When I arrived at our old home, I barely recognized the place. The warm, comfortable space we'd grown up in had been transformed into something that looked like it belonged in a designer magazine. Cold, impersonal, and now half empty where Vanessa had taken her things. Jake looked terrible. His eyes were red and swollen, his hair unwashed, his clothes rumpled as if he'd been wearing them for days. Thank you for coming, he said, pulling me into a hug that I only half returned. I didn't know who else to call. We sat at the kitchen counter, a sleek marble one that had replaced our old wooden table, and he filled me in on more details. He and Vanessa had been planning to get married. He'd already bought a ring. She'd been pressing him to add her to the house deed, but his lawyer had advised waiting until after the wedding, which had frustrated her. I should have seen the signs, he admitted. She was always asking about my finances, always pushing for joint accounts. I thought that's what couples did when they were serious. I couldn't help myself. And what about what couples do when one of them has a sibling? Do they typically kick that sibling out of their shared family home? Jake flinched as if I'd slapped him. I deserve that, he said quietly. I was an idiot. Worse than an idiot, I was cruel to my own sister. His eyes filled with fresh tears. I'm so sorry. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to know how sorry I am. Part of me wanted to stay angry, to make him feel the pain he'd caused me. But seeing him so broken, sitting in the shell of our once happy home, I couldn't do it. What do you need from me? I asked. I hate to even ask this, he said, staring down at his hands. But I can't make the mortgage payment this month. All my savings are gone, and I'm drowning in credit card debt. The bank is threatening foreclosure. I know I have no right to ask, but could you help? Just until I get back on my feet. The universe had a twisted sense of humor. My brother, who'd thrown me out, was now begging me to save our home. I'll think about it, I said, not ready to commit either way. Over the next few days, I did a lot of thinking. I talked it over with Michael, who amazingly didn't immediately tell me to let Jake suffer the consequences of his actions. I spoke with a financial advisor about what helping Jake might mean for my own financial future. Finally, I made my decision. I invited Jake to my apartment, my small, modest apartment that I'd made into a home despite the circumstances. I'll help you, I told him. But there are conditions. Relief flooded his face. Anything. Name it. First, the house gets put in both our names, legally, with proper documentation. No more of this, I'm the executor nonsense. He nodded quickly. Of course, it should have been that way all along. Second, I'm moving back in. It's my home too, and I want to be there. Another nod. Yes, absolutely. Third, you get financial counseling, real counseling with a professional. And therapy wouldn't hurt either. I've already looked into both, he said. You're right. And finally, I said, meeting his eyes, you need to understand that trust is earned. You broke mine in a fundamental way. I'm helping you because you're my brother and I love you, but rebuilding our relationship will take time. Jake's eyes filled with tears. I understand. And I'll do whatever it takes for however long it takes. I am so sorry. So that's where we are now. I've moved back into our family home. Jake and I are slowly rebuilding our relationship. The house is legally in both our names. He's in therapy, working through the issues that led him to choose someone like Vanessa, and I'm working on forgiveness. It's not perfect. There are still moments when the hurt and betrayal bubble up. When I remember how easily he cast me aside. But there are also moments of connection, glimpses of the brother I grew up with, the one who held my hand at our parents' funeral and promised we'd always have each other's backs. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if Vanessa hadn't revealed her true colors, if she'd gone through with marrying Jake. Would I have lost my brother forever? Would I have ever seen our family home again? These thoughts keep me up at night sometimes, but then I remember something my mother used to say. The people who stay in your life through the hard times are the ones worth keeping. Jake didn't stay through my hard time, but he's trying to make amends now, and I'm choosing to give him that chance. Not because he deserves it, but because that's what family does. At least, that's what this family does. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more emotional family stories from our channel.